I don't know about you, but if you've ever had one of those days that things didn't really go right, you worked and you just tried to go and go and go, and you were just physically exhausted at the end of the day. You went outside to go get in your car, and you sat down and you just went, ugh. You were even too tired to reach up there and turn the key to crank it to go home. And then as you pull in your driveway, you're like, how did I even get here? The car just drove itself. You were so tired. And then when you walk through the door of your house, all you wanted to do is walk in and sit down and go to sleep. There used to be a commercial that was out for some of the soaps and stuff, and it was called Calvary, Take Me Away. Many of you probably remember that commercial. Some of you probably never seen it. But anyway, for the ones of you that have seen it, remember it. It was always about how stressful that day was, and you were at the end of your day and you were to get in that tub and just relax. And I don't know if any of you have ever had those kind of days, but I'm going to be honest with you, I have. And you say, well, what about Jesus? Did Jesus ever have one of those days? And today we're going to look at a passage where Jesus had one of those days. If you have your Bibles, turn to Mark chapter 4. And this parable in Mark chapter 4 is a very known passage. You will probably know it as I read it. The title of this is Rest in Peace. In Mark chapter 4, verse 35, it's kind of neat to see this passage and relate it to our lives. On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, let us go across to the other side. And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. And other boats were with him. And the great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And he said to them, Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? Do you see that some of the things in which were taking place here was prior to this section that took place? Jesus had been out doing ministry. He had been ministering to crowds of people, been ministering one-on-one. And what you will realize is when you're doing ministry, the people in who you are encountering, they all have a need. Everyone has a need, and their need is different. And you're trying in your best ability to meet those needs and help those people, and you finally realize that you can't do it all. But you're using all your strength and all your energy, and at the end of the day has come, and it's time for you to go to the next place. You realize your physical body is just exhausted. Jesus was God, but he was God in human flesh, and his human flesh body needed rest. It had the same things in which our human bodies have. In this parable, it shows us that Jesus was very tired. And our first point, rest in peace, or salt after a tiring day. Look at verse 35 and 36. In verse 35, At the evening, meaning at the end of the day, Jesus had worked a full day of doing ministry. And Jesus was fatigued. He was tired. His muscles were sore. His feet, they probably ached. His back probably ached. And then when we look at verse 36, the pressure had come from the crowds. You see, Jesus had ministered and trying to meet the needs of the people all day long, up to evening. He hadn't made any time for himself. He hadn't backed off. He hadn't rested. Because the crowd was constantly in need and needing more and more from him. And the pressure from that and the want to try to help them was there. And so Jesus did his very best in what he could do to do that. But what we have to realize is Jesus came to a point in verse 35 and verse 36. He sought rest. At the end of the day, he was needing rest. And you know what? At the end of some of your days, it's okay to need rest. As you look on in verse 36, he was so fatigued that it says he went as he was without preparation. He went to sleep without washing his face, without saying his prayers. He just went to sleep. He didn't eat. He didn't nothing. He got in the boat and he laid down and he went to sleep. You know what? It's okay to be fatigued. But my question to you is, what is it that you're doing that is fatiguing you? What is it that you're doing that you're getting tired? What are you doing? Is it that of the Lord's work? Or is it that of the world and of yourself? Do you see that he spent all his energy and all his strength in which that was to do his Father's work? And he did it in such a way that when the day came to an end, he was fatigued. He was ready for some rest. And do you notice there at the end of verse 36? It says, other ships went also. Many times when we read this passage and we talk about this passage, we think about the one little boat where him and his disciples get in it and they take off and they do this little trip. But it tells us that it wasn't just their boat, it was other boats. And I don't know how many of you have ever been on a boat with a bunch of people, but it's not real quiet all the time unless you're able to go down below and get away from the crowd. And especially when other boats are around. Because you know they're yelling and talking back and forth to one another. But Jesus was so fatigued from doing his Father's work that he went to sleep. He went to sleep. And the thing is, it's okay to seek rest. Now I ask you to look at verses 37 and 38, our second point. Rest and peace can be experienced despite a great storm. When we see there in verse 37, it says, the ship filled with water. Now, when you're out on a boat and it gets a little windy and it gets a little choppy out there, sometimes you get a little splash, a little mist off the water. That's not going to fill your boat. But when the waves are huge and the waves are crashing over the side and they're coming in, think of the noise that's making. Whoosh! And the water splashing and going everywhere. And the water filling the boat. And the people yelling and the people screaming. The people trying to scoop the water out and get it out before it sinks. And it shows us in verse 37 that Jesus is still asleep through all this. Do you see just how tired he was? Look at verse 38. Jesus slept. It says he was in the back of the boat and he was sound asleep. And they came and woke him. He had to be awoken. The noise, the chaos, that wasn't going to wake him. Now, my next question to you, as we look at that, what is the storm that is going on right now in your life that you feel like you're about to sink? What is the storm that is in your life, the waves of life are crashing in around you, and you feel like you're about to perish? You think it's about to kill you. What is it? You see, we're about to get into this. But as we're getting to it, I want you to see it as we get to this. The disciples, the people, they really wasn't understanding who Jesus was. They wasn't understanding who he is. And they were panicking and they were freaking out about their storm and their situation. They were allowing it to consume them, and they were allowing it to cause them to sink. Many times we want to think about, what would Jesus do? What would Jesus do in this storm of life? What would Jesus do with these waves crashing in on me? What would Jesus do when my boat's about to sink? What would Jesus do? Well, you don't have to ask that question no more. It's right there in that verse. Sleep. Relax, chill out, and rest. Do you see the man in whom was right with the Father, sound asleep, snoring? But the ones in whom did not know who Jesus was, the ones in who wasn't right with Jesus, the ones in who wasn't in line with the Lord, were panicking and freaking out. And they come screaming and shaking him, trying to wake him up. Do you not care? How is your relationship with the Lord? Let me tell you something. Tell me about the storm going on in your life and tell me how you're handling it, and I'll tell you how your relationship with the Lord is. Because when our relationship with the Lord isn't right, we're freaking out, we're panicking, and we're not trusting God. In this great storm, there is a way to experience that peace and rest. Now I ask you to continue looking. Verse 38 and verse 39, our next point. Rest and peace are a concern to Jesus. Do you see there in verse 38 that the disciples feared lest they perish? They were scared that they were going to die. They were panicking there in verse 38. And they were asking Jesus, did he care? As if Jesus wasn't concerned about them. And then we look at how he was concerned. He didn't fuss at them for waking him up. He didn't get on to them for waking him up at that moment. He was sound asleep. They wake him up and like, do you care? And do you know one thing about people? Words are cheap. Actions speak volumes. And do you notice in this verse, after they wake him up, and do you care? Do you care? They wake him up. When they wake him up, he gets up, looks out. He says, "Come, be still." He didn't look at them and say, "Yeah, I care about y'all. Yeah, I don't want y'all drowning right now. I don't want y'all dying right now. We got work to do." No. He got up and he performed a miracle. He did an action. And do you realize that He wants to do that same thing in your life and my life in those storms. He wants to perform a miracle. Do you notice there in verse 39, the power of Jesus to control the situation? Do you see it there? He woke and He rebuked the wind and the sea. His power was there to control the situation. You see, before He confronted them about anything in this situation, He performed a miracle in such a way that He got their attention, that their hearts would be sensitive to listen to what He had to say and what He had to show them. You see, our storms in life, our friends and our family, a lot of them know what's going on. A lot of times we wear a mask and we put up a front and we don't let a lot of people know our storms. But you see, the people in whom do know our storms and our situation, the way we handle it is speaking volumes to them. How we handle it, and if we handle it in a godly manner, in a godly fashion, it opens up their heart and their eyes to what the Lord is doing in our lives without us ever saying or doing anything else. See, that's what happened right here. And when you come on down to the next part of this passage, our fourth point, rest and peace, comes through two sources. Verse 40 and verse 41. He said to them, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" He's telling them, why are you in the middle of this storm? Why are you panicking? Why are you freaking out? Why are you afraid? Why are you stressing out over this? And this is a part for me that God's really trying to teach me. When it comes to stress and worrying, I'm the king culprit of it all. That's one of my biggest sins I struggle with is worry. And I'll stand before you right now and tell you that. And after a period of time of me worrying and stressing about things in my life and storms, God finally says, "Well, are you about done? Are you ready for me to intervene now and take care of this? But I only will do that when you trust me and you will have the faith that I will carry you through this, Wes." You see, that's what He was telling the disciples. There's no sense in this. You got to have that faith. And as He's showing them that one of the sources for true rest and peace through a storm is faith, He doesn't stop there. He goes on to verse 41. And in verse 41, they were filled with great fear and said to one another, "Who is this?" You see, in verse 41, it kind of reemphasizes back to verse 39. Through Jesus, His power and His word. You see, back in verse 39, His power in the situation stood up, and then His word, "Calm. Be still." And then there was peace. You see, we have to have the faith that the Lord desires for us to have. And we have to realize that is one of the sources for peace. And the other source for peace is the power of Jesus through His word. We have to spend time in His word that we know it, so that when the storms of life do come, we can have peace and we can have rest. You see, when you're totally fatigued and you're totally worn out, there's nothing else you can do for the Lord but rest. And if you spend every day of your life fatigued and worn out, What do you think you're really accomplishing for God day in and day out? Nothing. We have to get rest when it's time to rest. And when it's time to be about the Lord's work, we have to be about the Lord's work. And we have to do it in such a way that we're walking in His power and in our faith and trust in Him and in no other way. Here's the thing. How's your relationship with Jesus? You may be here and saying, Wes, I don't have a relationship with Jesus. Well, I'm going to tell you, the storms in which you're facing in your life is probably a massive hurricane. You are probably stressed past the max, and your boat is probably already done went underwater. And you're probably dog paddling out there, about to drown. I don't know how people can get through life without a true relationship with Jesus Christ. I don't know how they do it. But if you do say, Wes, I do have a relationship with Jesus, but it's just not the way it needs to be. Well, today's the day you need to get it back on track with Him. Today's the day you need to get it in line, that you may be able to go through the storms of life in such a way you affect others by your actions. Not by your words, but by your actions, just like Jesus did. And if you're here today and you're like, Wes, I got a relationship with Jesus. I got a good relationship. Make sure your actions is reflecting Christ, that others' lives may be changed for His glory and His honor. But you're going to be one of those three people here this morning. Who are you? If you're the first one and you realize you don't have that relationship with the Lord, I pray that today you don't leave this place until you do. If you do have a relationship with Him, but you know that you're not right with Him, I pray that today you'll get right with Him. Let me tell you, you're not promised tomorrow. You're not promised another minute. But you have the choice. What you going to do? Are you going to get right with Him? Or are you going to rebel against Him? Because I'm going to tell you, the storms in life are going to cause you to sink if you're not. Let's pray. Father, love you, praise you.